I see EV trajectory to have transitioned massively, right? Starting from a very small city car, low range, charging only at your home, having an EV as your second car, to now EV becoming a trend, something that you would love to own, not just a necessity, not just for economic benefits of saving fuel by just charging at your home. You're looking for an electric vehicle to be on the trend, be one of the early tech adopters, and then conscious about the impact you are having on the environment, right? Charging becomes more of a pit stop. It's a pit stop in between a long journey. So BP has to transition according to how the industry is moving.
Welcome to another episode of the Local Marketing Beat, brought to you by Overall. I'm your host, Christian Arriola, and I'm excited that you're joining us in another episode. The Local Marketing Beat is all about helping location marketers stay in the know on the hottest digital trends across the web. We'll surface the need-to-know updates related to local digital marketing and ask the experts what they know, why it matters, and what it means for location marketers. Quick peek of housekeeping, we're now on Spotify, so feel free to listen on the go if you prefer. Otherwise, if you're watching this on YouTube and interested in listening in another language, try turning on closed captioning and select your auto-generated subtitles. It's a great way to expand since we do have an audience across the globe. So what's the beat on the local marketing street this month? I'm pretty excited because we're talking about cars. We're talking about electric vehicles, which is one of my biggest passions in the world. So we're talking about EVs, right? Specifically location management for EV charge point operators, also known as CPOs. And it's going to be very interesting because we actually have Vaibhav from BP. Welcome to the show, Vaibhav.
Thank you so much, Christian. I'm glad to be here.
And I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. Like I said, I'm a big car guy, and I know we're gonna dig deeper into all things EV and electrical. But before we get started on that, I just want to kick things off here. I want to ask you a question. I want to hear, because we're all about location and finding local things around us. What was the last thing you searched locally that you went online, you looked for something, you were searching for something locally? What was that? What's the story there?
Yeah, I think the last search I probably did was for finding a parking spot. And I've always found that to be tricky. So I see that very similar to somebody finding a charging location. So there is some strategy there, which I feel there will be an alignment in the future going into aligned parking plus charging locations. But mine was a parking spot.
Okay. Can you tell us what the parking spot was for? Was this were you going to somewhere special?
Well, no, just going into London, and there's always been difficult to get a parking spot. Find an appropriate one in London. So going to London, finding a parking, big challenge.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you. Well, I mean, the EV scene has grown, right, tremendously in the past decades, years, months. But even as weeks go by, it just keeps changing nonstop, especially right now. So obviously, there's lots of government-based initiatives encouraging the adoption and growing of consumers, right, to shift towards EVs. Some of the outstanding stats that we were looking at is in 2020, EV sales accounted for 4%. And then 2 years later, in 2022, that number increased to 14%, which is like absolutely stunning, right? Like it's so big, especially in Europe, right? We know this is bigger in Europe. One in every 5 cars sold in 2022 was electric. Like these numbers are just like so big, right? Because of the number of cars that are being sold, it's a humongous number, and 20% of those being EV is a big drastic change in how we live and what we drive. So I know companies like BP are working to address the challenges that come along with that, right? Because of the fast growing market is really putting you guys into really understanding the perspective. So let's go back to the beginning and talk, if you can talk to us about what were those early days of EV like before all this craziness exploded?
Yeah, I mean, before I dip into it, it may be worth giving a little bit of context on my background because I come from an OEM background. I've worked with an OEM the last more than a decade before I joined BP. So I do come from an OEM electrification and digital solutions for electrification and connected vehicles. And thereon, I came into BP and took on the role of managing locations. Uh, so I do understand a bit about how the industry and transition has transitioned both from an OEM and a CPO perspective. So from a overall industry perspective, I see EV trajectory to have transitioned massively, right? Starting from a very small city car, low range, charging only at your home, having an EV as your second car, to now EV becoming a trend, something that you would love to own, not just a necessity, not just for economic benefits of saving fuel by just charging at your home. You're looking for an electric vehicle to be on the trend, be one of the early tech adopters, and then conscious about the impact you are having on the environment, right? So there are a lot of factors that are coming together. And when you tie these up with the regulations that, you know, are getting imposed, if you live in London, you probably do not have a choice anymore to not buy an EV, right? And slowly this will expand. And so there are a lot of factors that are coming into play here, which is defining the strong steep trajectory of increase of growth for electric vehicles.
I love that you mentioned the beginning of EV because I completely forgot. EVs used to be these little tiny cars that were so slow, right? Like they had no power. I mean, they were not fast. They could barely do 20 miles on a charge. But now you say EV and we all think about luxury technology and so fast, right? It's crazy how
Exactly.
that has changed. And so with
Exactly.
this in mind, what are BP's key focuses and plans for 2024 in this sector in all these changes?
Yeah. So uh, it's very similar to the trajectory that we have seen. And earlier, we had smaller batteries, um, lesser number of vehicles. People expected charging for long periods, and therefore there were a lot of AC chargers that were public, and there were a lot of charging offerings that were being done at home itself. Now, as we increase and the battery sizes, the ranges increase, charging becomes more of a pit stop. It's a pit stop in between a long journey. So BP has to transition according to how the industry is moving. Now, because of that, there is a clear shift from an AC focused destination charger, home charging business to a more forecourt services, or next to highways, key locations where people stop for a quick charging pit stop, use a lot of amenities, because that's critical going ahead. That's part of the charging experience, and then they move forward. So high speed DC charging is where the trajectory is moving from a slow AC charging destination and home charging business.
That's awesome. And I remember years ago when I started seeing chargers pop up like at supermarkets or malls, and I would think to myself, this was very new, right? I would think to myself, I was like, why would you have to drive from home to charge it here? I was like, it's the other way, is because you're going to the store now. You can also charge at the same time that you're going to the store.
Yeah, and also because the battery sizes were small, right? So, for example, If your battery sizes took you 30 miles, 50 miles at max, right? You've driven 30 odd miles, you've driven 40 odd miles to reach a parking spot, whichever destination you went to, you would want to have a charger there so that you can plug it in, have enough juice to come back to your home as well. So that's what was driving the model. Now, if you have 350, 400 miles worth of range, that use case starts to become less and less important. You tend to charge, one, if you do not have a home charger at your home, and two, if you are driving long distances, right? And you're stopping for a pit stop, you want to use toilets, you want to grab a coffee, you want to have something quick to eat, you plug it in, get enough juice for the rest of your journey. So that's how the model and the use case has evolved.
That makes sense, and I think that you hit something in the head there, where it's people on the road, they need it soon, right? Because either if it's long travel or they want to make a quick stop, and basically searching probably online, right? So with that, what do you think is the ultimate goal for these charge point operators, which are also known as CPOs? I just don't want to throw that word without people really understanding. But what do you believe is the ultimate goal for them right now as we see things progress this year?
That's kind of critical, right? So the first step for a CPO is to get chargers in the ground. Even for that, you need to know where to put the chargers in the ground. So you need location intelligence to be able to decide what's the best place for a charger to be installed. Second, once you've installed the charger, you have to get customers to your chargers. And increasing your charging sessions, increasing the utilization of your chargers so they are utilized to their maximum, least amount of empty bays. That's the key focus area for any CPO, including BP. And that's where location management, search engine optimization, how do our charges appear on multiple channels that customers are using to find charges? How do we appear on different navigation apps, in-vehicle dashboards? That is the key prime driver for revenue for any CPO. So once you've installed your charger, you have to get customers to your chargers. That's where what we're doing with yourselves and the SEO and just getting your charges on the right channels, that's highly critical.
And you mentioned a few of those main channels. What do you think are the most, specifically for EV, which ones do you think are the most important key players that are a must? Like, you got to start there.
Yeah, so there's a lot of variation from market to market, right? But there's one player that's kind of on the top for all markets, and that's Google. So people are still using Google Maps for finding the charges.
Gotcha.
Then there are players in each market. There's ZapMap primarily in UK. There's PluxShare in some of the other markets. There's AVRP. There's several other very localized apps that are doing really well. But what I also feel is of critical importance is integrating with the in-car dashboards, because still live battery performance, live battery life data is still sitting with the OEM and in your dashboard. So you can plan your route, right? You can plan your route sitting on your sofa. You plan that, okay, I need to travel 300 miles. I can do a pit stop at 150 miles, which is this. You've chosen that. When you start driving, that morning was very cold. You have laden your vehicle with a lot of luggage. Suddenly you find you are in need of a charge 50 miles before what you had intended. So what do? So you have to have the capability of rerouting, knowing nearby chargers from your vehicle itself. So in that scenario, getting your locations into the vehicle dashboard becomes very critical as well. So there are both those elements. There's an element of pre-trip planning. Most of the times that will work, but then there is ad hoc planning when you need charge right away, right? So there are those two things that I think are critical.
That makes sense. And I think that that also brings additional challenges, right? Because you plan your route, you're running lower on battery than you expected. So you got to make a pit stop no matter what. But now there's different types of chargers, there's different types of vehicles. Not everything is one size fits all. So I know this is like one of those big challenges or barriers. But what could you tell us about that, or maybe other type of challenges that you're seeing in the EV space as you're trying to put these locations for people to find them?
There are several, right? And we'll touch on them. The first is to get the data right. Whatever the data is, at least get that right. Now, the trouble is that there are multiple sources. There are multiple sources of data. Different channels are using multiple sources to aggregate the data. And there's no one single source of truth. So what that means is, as a customer, I'm not convinced that the data I'm seeing is accurate. So that's the first biggest hurdle. How do we ensure the data is accurately reflected on the channels that customers are consuming? Then the second is, how do you centralize it? If you have to create that streamlined process of data input to data output, you have to centralize the processes a bit so you can control the data. So that's where the likes of eco movement, aggregators like eco movement, or listing optimizers like Uber all come into play, where we can streamline the data flow and say, yes, this is our data, we claim it, you can believe in it. So that to me is the second most interesting one. And then the third one is, what are the data points that customers are using to choose a charger? Charging speed, plug type, live availability, amenities on the site. Can I park there? Is my car too big for that parking bay? If I am driving a van, will I even fit there? If I need accessible chargers, is this site accessible? Right? Are there toilets on the site? I want a coffee. Is there a coffee? Are there any parking restrictions? Opening hours, is it even open? There's so many different attributes of a charging site that become important when a customer is making the decision to choose a charger. So first of all, having all that data, then aggregating it, and then ensuring that channels show that data, that is where the whole complexity comes in. So these are the challenges. When it comes to standardization, I see that going away soon, right? Soon we'll see standardization in kind of a port type. There is a challenge of how customers interpret charging speeds, right? I was talking to you earlier about it, because many times, CPOs will say, yeah, this is a 300 kilowatt charger, or it's a 150 kilowatt charger. Now, a customer needs to know, or needs to understand, whether their car will be able to support a 300 kilowatt charger, or because their battery management system may not be able to support that high speeds. So you plug into a 300 kilowatt charger, but the peak output your car can get is just 100 kilowatts. You'll never see that 300 kilowatt charger, right? So that creates a loss of faith between the customer and the service provider, because they think you're not getting what you offered me. Right? So there's a case for more user education around what speeds are you going to get. It will also depend on what level of battery you are on, right? So if you are plugging in when you are already on 70, you're never going to get high speeds of 250, 300 kilowatts, because you are at the peak of your charging curve and you're already coming down, right? If you are at 10% or 20%, then you can get very high speeds. If you keep plugged in, so the amount of time it takes for a battery to reach from 20 to 80 is roughly the same amount of time it takes it to get from 80 to 100. So so that's the sort of education that needs to be, imparted through OEMs, through CPOs, through aggregators, that, how do customers interpret these charging speeds? They better understand it. So they can know which charger to go to. Right? They don't need to pay for a very high speed charger if their battery can only support 100 kilowatt. They might as well pay a little less for a slightly lesser charging speed. So that's the sort of, I think, understanding that we need to build.
Wow, that's fascinating. I think you covered most angles, and it's funny because we talk to a lot of large brands here in the podcast, and we're always talking about, how people pick their products or their stores on Google Maps based on reviews and pictures and their attributes and what do they offer, right? So it's very fascinating that this is like next layer of complexity, because now we're talking about a lot more information that you need to get right, right? For you as a charging station, and then the consumer as a consumer also needs to pick the right one based on that. So I think that's pretty fascinating. And can you tell us a little bit of what kind of strategy are you guys at BP following, tackling these industry challenges? What is your perspective on how are you not just solving it, but hopefully trying to get ahead of it?
So, one thing that listing management would have never had a challenge of is live data. Right? They need to know minute by minute whether a charger is plugged in, whether a charger is broken, when was the last it got charged. And that is why I would say, I have found that Google may be even lacking in the race to getting to that point of, being the foolproof go-to app for my charging needs, right? That's why there's this challenge of managing these many multiple applications for a customer, because they cannot depend on just Google to give them the right information of their charger, because there's a lot of live data availability aspect. There's a lot of customer review requirement here. It's not the importance of having the right customer review on an EV charger becomes so much more important, because people use that to find out whether the last charge that was done was successful or not. When was it last that somebody did a successful charge? So there are a lot of additional challenges to listing management which EV charging brings, which traditionally were not there. So therefore we have to attack it from two strategies, which is one, you have to get the best live data. And secondly, you have to optimize the listings and claim the listings so people can be convinced that this particular charger is providing the right information. This is owned by the right business. So that's where our partnership with Eco Movement and overall is coming into play, which we have done over last year or so, where we ensure that the data is streamlined and we are creating a singular pipeline for data flow for EV information. And instead of getting data from multiple sources, we try and channel all our data through one channel. So data accuracy and data quality can be controlled. And then once the data is there, we ensure that data goes to overall, while we also supply the data to overall. So there's a level of validation that happens at that point as well. And then overall can claim that site, and we can overall also has access to the live data that is being sent through Eco Movement. So you get access to live data, you get data from two sources, which are both validated. So you can also do a cross-validation of those two sources to be 100% sure, right? And then whatever customer is seeing is a claim site with live data and all the EV information in an accurate way. So that's the strategy of how we're trying to, resolve or come up with a solution to the challenge.
That's awesome. I mean, it sounds like there's multiple layers of validation, trying to be as accurate as possible, because I can imagine, right? Like it's kind of like looking at, I don't know, maybe going to the movie theater, looking at show times. You go on Google and it says certain show times, and then you go to their website and it's different times, the same location, and you're like, so which one do I believe?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
So
that's why having that validation is so important. Control of data. So we maintain the source, you know, to be one. Google gets data from hundreds of sources. So how do we ensure our data is the one that's getting reflected? And the same for other channels. And we tend to talk a lot more about Google and not so much about other channels. I mean, it's probably fine because that's the most used channel, but there are many other channels, especially from an EV perspective, where people tend to use many other channels. So it's the same importance has to be given to other channels as well.
yeah, no, that makes total sense. And if there's any, CPOs listening to us, are there any best practices that you could share with them on managing the flow of the data and locations and things like that? Because I would really like to see this locations continue to be optimized and improved, because obviously at the end of the day, it's going to make a better user experience for the EV driver, right?
Yeah, so I think some of the things that I've touched on, we have to maintain the source of data. We have to control the data flow. So that is very important. And especially when there are so many channels, so many MSPs, so many different ways customers are consuming data from, we have to ensure that the data is coming from one source, or we do not quantify that data, right? So if this site is claimed, only then we can ensure accuracy of data. And so that part is very critical. And then secondly, I think customers are not just looking for charging, they are looking for a charging experience. And having amenities on the site, having the right attributes of a site uh, would be very, very important, because when you are charging, you're spending more time on the site, you're spending 20 to 30 minutes on a site, you need something to do during that time. And you want to make that charging experience a better one. So I think these two elements are the most critical ones in ensuring a better charging experience for our customers.
That's great. I mean, hopefully everybody listening follows this advice. I think is goal. Now, looking into the future, what's your take on that? What do you think is the future of EV in the next several years?
Yeah, so I think the experience has to be very, very integrated, right? So there are so many players involved. There's government, there's regulators. What are the incentives that governments are offering? How many EVs do get sold, right? There is now a curve of early adopters that is now going away. So there will be the next stage of EV adoption, which will be a more mass adoption. So you have to keep abreast with how quickly the market is moving from volumes perspective. The OEMs would have to integrate well with the ecosystems. They've always had their own bespoke navigation systems, right? So I see that getting evolved into two or three global navigation players that are offering both in vehicle and uh, you know an app experience or an MSP experience. I see those getting streamlined because at the moment it's broken. You do a search on your phone, you get your car, it's a different route, it's a different charger, right? So that experience has to be aligned, and the ecosystems will have to merge. They can't remain siloed. But essentially, the experience would look like you plan a trip on your sofa, you send your destination to your car. Uh, Both your phone and your car has same ecosystem. You get into your car, you drive away, you are able to reserve the charging spot, the charging uh, time slot where you plan to charge. You get to that charge. You have a plug-in charge experience where you don't even need to get out of the car from a payment perspective. Obviously, you have to plug in your car, but you don't need to get your card out. You don't need to pay. The plug-in charge experience works seamlessly. You grab till the time your car is charging. You grab a coffee. I see the charging durations getting shortened to 10 minutes. So within 10 minutes, your car is ready from 10 till 80%, and you drive away, right? So we can't have multiple EMSPs. Customers will have at max 1 or 2 apps on their phones, and all these ecosystems would be integrated. So I see a fairly integrated ecosystem. I don't see a way around it. I think it has to happen. Otherwise, it becomes too difficult for a good customer experience.
That's great. This is really interesting stuff. And I really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through this, give us a little bit of the perspective on, your side and VP side versus what we as consumers see, right? Because we are on that side where, and I don't need me, I don't have an EV, but I know that people who do, some of the challenges too, right? The whole discrepancies and really finding accurate data. So really appreciate you for being here and for guiding us and sharing a lot of your insights and whatnot. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed the discussion as well.
Yeah, and with that, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. If you like this episode of the Local Marketing Beat, please give it a like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And with that, if you want to learn more about EV and location management, head over to uberall.com. And I'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.